We're a global nonprofit, a 501c3 in the United States. But we've grown over the 30 plus years that we've been in doing what we do to serve 950 entrepreneurship centers, which include incubators, accelerators, and economic development organizations that are focused on entrepreneurship as a strategic initiative in their communities. We're in 62 countries around the world today, and in Canada we have about 35 organizations that represent about 150 individual members in our organization as well. We'll talk briefly about some of those organizations here as I get into my spiel. And I apologize, I'm not going to be able to read that, so I may have to turn around a little bit here and there. I'm old and blind, so bear with me on that. As Alicia had mentioned, our mission basically is to help communities all around the world grow their economic prosperity through entrepreneurship. And we do that by providing programs, services, events like this, a lot of research. We do professional development training for folks that are involved with entrepreneurial ecosystem development. And we also, there was something really important that we do that I just forgot, that I was going to tell you all about. Anyway, I'll get to it all as we go through the spiel here. So I want to talk a little bit about some things that I'm sure you guys are aware of, but maybe really hadn't put some thought into exactly what it means with respect to your roles as economic development folks in your communities. I'm about halfway through reading Thomas Friedman's Thank You for Being Late. Has anybody read that book in here? If you haven't, it's an interesting read. It's rather long. You don't have to read it all. You could probably go get the Cliffs Notes and get the gist of it. But he talks about 3 accelerations that are going on. Again, we're aware of these. One is an acceleration in technologies. Another one is climate change. And the third one is just the global connectivity that's going on. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the technology because it's going to, I think, be highly impactful to everything that all of us do in our worlds. According to a vice president at Google, who I can't read his name, the progress in the 21st century will be equivalent to about 20,000 years of progress that's gone on in our past at the pace we're going today. This will undermine everything that's going on from a societal perspective, hopefully in a positive way, but everything that we do will be redefined as a result of what's going on. So just to really, bring this home, he was talking about the next, century, but I want to share with you guys some things that have gone on just in the past 10 years. What we've experienced already has been a total paradigm shift in the global competitive landscape thanks to some of the technology changes that are going on. How many of you guys have a mobile device? Guess what? You did not have one 10 years ago because in 2007, that's when Apple introduced the iPhone. Anybody thought about that? You don't really think about it. 10 years ago, none of us had a mobile device. Today, 4.7 billion people in the globe have a mobile device. And in fact, it's ubiquitous in Africa and the Middle East and some countries and other regions of the globe that you might not really have thought about. How many of you guys use the cloud just to back up your stuff on your computer or on your phone? Anybody? Anybody? Probably all of you, right? Well, in 2007, that didn't exist either. That is the year that Amazon introduced global or storage, cloud storage. It was $10 an hour to rent a virtual computer at that time. Today, we pay, $9, $10 a month to store like gigabytes, terabytes of data, and it's virtually free. This is going to get a little technical. I'm a software engineer by trade, so bear with me on this, but open source software is huge. So, and what this is software developers all around the world are now putting their code that they're developing out there in that cloud for other software developers around the world to borrow and use for free. Did you have a question? Oh, no problem. I was ready to go. This saved me from talking. Anywho, so there's this open source virtual library. It's called GitHub. For those of you guys that are software nerds, you may know what this is. But anybody have Android on their mobile devices? Google has given that away for free. And it's out there, and that's so, Samsung and all the different phones that use Android as their operating system are using that for free. And that's just an example of open source software. But all of the major organizations, IBM, Oracle, Facebook, all of them, they're putting the back-end interfaces to their platforms out there for free. So other application developers can go in and start using that. And that's creating this virtual global network of, of software out there that's basically driving all of those really cool apps you guys have on your phones right now. Currently, there's about 12 million software engineers using the code on this platform called GitHub, which is where they're storing and sharing their code as they develop it. And there are 1.4 billion Android users globally, all using that software for free. This is another little technical thing, but this is a technology called Hadoop. You guys have probably all heard the buzzwords big data, though, in your roles as economic development folks, right? Hadoop is this platform, this technology that's driving big data. It was developed, Google graciously shared, open sourced, their search engine algorithms that they had going on way back about 10 years ago, magically. And an engineer in, I think it's Stanford, picked it up and put it, did some weebie-jeebie software magic and put it back out there, called it Hadoop. He named it after a little elephant toy that his baby boy was attached to. And this is the technology now that is driving all of the connections of all of the big, huge data sets that are out there that we all have come to call big data. In 2007, the only thing out there was these things called databases, and they were very static. You could probably pull up a computer, probably didn't have any cool graphics on it back then, but it could give you some listing of your name and your address and whatever. That's a database. Now we're connecting documents, meta tags on imagery, video content, all of this stuff. It's called unstructured data, and it's all getting connected in and accessible through this thing called Hadoop. And it's very important, and it's critical to the whole big data trend that's happening these days. Internet of Things. Anybody talking about Internet of Things in your economic development world? That is all being driven by these things called sensors. And pretty much, for refrigerators and cars and, of course, your phones and everything else these days have sensors on them. But in 2007, just 10 years ago, these were not open systems. They were very, closed black box systems. You could not access the data going on unless you were a rocket scientist. And it was just not really relevant to be able to connect these things. But now between the internet and Hadoop and all the things I just walked you through, these sensors now are connected to each other, and that's what's causing this Internet of Things trend. And today, it's all advanced intelligent software that's running because memory has also become micro-sized, so you can put huge amounts of memory chips on a little tiny device, so you can store a lot of data going on in a sensor, and then when it connects into the internet, it can upload it whenever it's able to do that. And then the current trend, anybody heard of artificial intelligence, AI? That is being driven as the next generation of these systems, because now there's data, and we can collect it, and we can analyze it, and these software engineers are pretty darn smart, and they're figuring out how to write algorithms to make decisions based on that data and have these devices self-learn and regulate. And all of this stuff will impact everything you guys are doing, from the energy monitoring all the way up to what's going on with your education of your children in your school systems. So what does all this mean to us? Well, our world is changing. And it is completely redefining the definition of entrepreneurship and the role it's going to play at a global level in economic development. So just to give you some case studies, I know that many of you are running hail from communities that are in rural Canadian environments, a little bit of snow, things like that, a little hard to get to once in a while, lots of driving with chains, I think. I don't know what those are. But in any case, I'm just going to share 3 case studies. So if you guys think you guys got it crazy, see what these folks have done. So this particular entrepreneur was a gentleman who was just typical entrepreneur, out-of-the-box thinker, and decided to start a company in Batman. Yes, Batman was the name of his town, in eastern Turkey. And so he basically, sorry, I'm gonna have to turn around real quick. So what he's developed is a platform that monitors the media and social channels for politicians and government officials. I think Donald Trump probably should use this stuff. Might help him shut up. Anyway, stores about 1 million stories a day. He's using the cloud to do this, and he's storing all of his data. And he has grown this company. It's still a family-owned company himself, and he brought in his 6 sisters to run this company. None of them had a formal education. Today, those sisters are doing things like running the app store and running the marketing and the social media campaigns and whatnot. There are hundreds of employees in his little town of Batman in eastern Turkey running this company, and it's a very successful software company in Batman, eastern Turkey. So if you don't think it can be done in your communities, it can, and it's these technology drivers that are making that happen. Another example, Pagatech. This gentleman is from Nigeria. And in his country 10 years ago, people were getting cell phones. Everybody had a cell phone, because I think Africa probably beat all of the first world developed countries, especially the US. We are like the last ones to get going when it comes to our cell phone infrastructure. But Africa, had an opportunity to lay out their infrastructure from the ground up with cellular technology, and they've done it. And so he saw that, but he came to the U.S. to go to school, and he was impressed with the cash flow, the ease of the ability for money transfer and cash flow to happen in the Western world. And when he went back home, he started lobbying his government and his local officials to try to make that happen. But in rural Africa, there's no banks. Everybody pays in cash. A lot of these are, tribal folks. They all have cell phones, but they're wearing tribal robes and they're herding sheep as they're doing their thing. I've been to Africa. It's really amazing what they do. And so he was able to lobby his government to get some of the infrastructure he needed to increase the bandwidth speeds of some of the mobile networks in rural Africa. And then once he did that, he basically built a system to allow financial and mobile money transfers using these cell phones that pretty much everybody in Africa had. And today, there's 170 million people there. As I said, 80% of Nigerians own a cell phone. He has 200 employees today and is doing very well in rural Nigeria, Africa. Last example I have is Rosie. They were founded in 2007 in Pakistan. Now, Pakistan, as is the case in many Middle Eastern countries, has a very rigid social culture ecosystem, such that it's tribal, and in addition to that, there's gender is a very segmented thing in the Middle East, and so the ability to network and find opportunities, whether it be for dating or for jobs or other things, is very, very restricted in the Middle East because of the cultural norms that they have. And this gentleman, he again came to the U.S. He was in Silicon Valley, and he went to school there, and he worked for some software companies for a bit. He got connected in with the venture capital community in Silicon Valley as a result of his time there, and again was just impressed with the way Americans overachieve on their social norms and whatnot, and thought, gosh, if we could take at least a fraction of that back to Pakistan, it would really help with respect to dating and jobs and all the different things that are very difficult to do in the Middle East. So he went back, and he was able to convince some venture capitalists in Silicon Valley to invest in his company, and there was a lot of concern because of the terrorism threats. And yet they did it for social good. And he was able to take that funding, and he launched basically a LinkedIn, and he also launched a Match.com in Pakistan to help address some of those issues. Both are doing very well today. And again, just like was the case with the rest of the companies I shared, he was able to overcome cultural barriers and use the technology accelerators that are out there to build this company in a place that you wouldn't expect. He is, though, storing all of his data on US-based servers, so he's taking advantage of the cloud and the data storage capabilities that are out there to reduce the risk of his company running into problems if there is a terrorist attack in Pakistan. So what does this mean to all of us? Again, this whole change is a tectonic shift. The Industrial Revolution impacted millions of people over the course of several decades. This is a billion-person story, and within 10 years has already created a paradigm shift that's only going to go faster and faster as technology innovation continues to accelerate. So in your roles as economic development professionals, it's probably behooves you to pay attention, but more importantly, think about ways you can take advantage of this, or your communities can take advantage of these trends that are going on. And also, what I'm going to do here is just go through some thoughts I have. These are very high level. and just share with you some things that I've seen, because I do travel around the world in my role, because we are an international organization. I've seen some pretty interesting things. Again, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but it takes a village to create a company. Our organization obviously has a whole network of entrepreneurship centers and entrepreneurial ecosystem builders, but none of those would be successful if they didn't have financial and personnel support from the actors around them. So that's your universities, your governments, your economic development organizations, your corporates, your universities, all of that stuff. It all needs to come together in a very cohesive ecosystem. And the cities and regions around the world that are doing this well are the ones that are bubbling to the top, and it's happening very quickly. When I travel around, everybody wants to be like Silicon Valley. That's ridiculous. I mean, why? You guys have amazing resources here in Alberta, and when I go over to, I was in Poland, and it just blew my mind how resourceful and hardworking and how much their labor force is extremely well educated, just like it is here in Canada. Don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Worry about what you're doing and do it well and take advantage of all these resources you have. But the key is to connect them. And for those of us that are not the entrepreneurs themselves, you got to take a back seat. If you've read Brad Felt's book, he has a book called Startup Communities. He has this thing called leaders versus feeders. These ecosystems should be led by entrepreneurs, and the rest of the organizations should be supporting them and feeding in their resources, money, expertise, the ability to create collisions, things like that, things that you all do very, very well already. As I just mentioned, and I'll say it again, this is probably, if I had to say one takeaway, make sure your entrepreneurs in your communities are leading these initiatives. There's nothing like getting your butt kicked when you're starting a company, especially if you failed a couple times before you managed to pull it off, to understand what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And if you've got a university executive or the mayor of your city's trying to run these initiatives and they don't have that experience, it's highly likely to fail. Doesn't mean they shouldn't have a key leadership seat at the table on boards and on the advisory committees and things like that. It just means you really need to pay attention to having your entrepreneurs running and helping to provide input as to what these ecosystems should look like. The other thing I'll say is you have to be in it a really long time. When you have elected officials, they, in most cases, except the United States Congress, they have term limits. And so they're very driven to do something within their terms, whether it be 4 years or 8 years or 12 years, whatever it is. If they can't get some initiative done that can be their legacy in their term, they tend to not be interested. But it takes 20, 30, 40 years to build entrepreneurial ecosystems out. And so in your roles, you guys are the sustainable entities that can cross those term limits and really be key drivers to help make that happen. And last but not least, I'll talk about this a little more, but be inclusive of everyone. Get out of the box. You'd be surprised at what can happen if you let oddballs come to the table and help drive some of the conversations. So a little bit about the different entrepreneurship center models. Excuse me, I need to grab a drink of water. May I have my bottle of water right there? Actually, that little bottle right there is mine. If you just hand me that, I'll be good. Thanks. In our organization, we have, as I mentioned, incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces, things like that. I did want to spend a few minutes walking through the definitions of these three things, in particular accelerators, co-working spaces, and incubators, because the media just completely mangles this on a regular basis. And it's pretty much my soapbox right now to get this straight so everybody understands the rules. So real quick, let me grab a drink. I'll start with co-working spaces because they're all the rage right now. How many of you guys have co-working spaces in your communities? Okay, cool. That's what I figured. Co-working spaces are awesome places, by the way. They create this really cool vibe. They're very, very good at creating what I'll call collisions, which is a really important component of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. A place where entrepreneurs can come in, they can meet like-minded people. There's usually events like meetups and lots of beer flowing and whatnot. And never-ending coffee. But it's good. It's an absolutely critical entity in an ecosystem. At least in most of the places I visited, these are, in most cases, for-profit entities. It's a real estate play. They're making money by renting desks. That's not a bad thing. Again, they have a key role, but I just want to point out that they don't have an economic development mission. They have a for-profit mission. And so sometimes that can be at odds with, again, some of the things we've already talked about, the long-term economic health of your communities. They also, in most cases, tend to serve what we call solo entrepreneurs. So these are folks that are running web design companies or marketing companies, or they might be lawyers or whatnot. And, it's not necessarily just one person in their company, but typically it's 1 to 10. That tends to be generally what they're serving. Open space, it's very much a lifestyle-oriented company. They're not in it to serve companies that have high growth potential. They're in it to fill the desk and keep the desk full, and they get really sad when companies leave, because then they have to go find new people to fill those desks. And so they don't have a graduation timeline, per se, for getting companies grown up and out the door. Next up is accelerators, and I'll dive a little bit more into for-profit versus nonprofit accelerators. But the for-profit accelerators, many of you might have heard of, things like Techstars and Y Combinator and things like that. Those are very, very great models, but it's extremely difficult to get them to work. These days, those accelerators, I wouldn't put them in the category of an entrepreneurship program. I'd put them in the category of venture capital. The ones that are doing really well have big funds. So they go and they cherry pick companies from all around the world. They bring them to wherever they're running their program. And it's an amazing opportunity for, if your entrepreneurs are selected to be in these programs, send them. It's like sending your kids to college. It's good, because they will go learn a whole bunch. They'll get exposed to a fantastic network of mentors from all around the world if they get into the right programs. And there's only about 10 of them that I would recommend. The other bazillion of the accelerators out there, there's some room for improvement. But when they're done, they have access then to capital, and they will give up a chunk of their companies to participate in these programs. But if they're a good company and they've done the right thing, which they wouldn't have gotten selected if they weren't, they're going to be on the fast track for getting some of the capital. And this is great. The catch is they're basically for software companies, because those accelerators, 99% of the cases, are looking for high growth, quick exits. That's software companies. They're not so good for what I call deep tech, so energy-related companies or advanced research that might be coming out of your universities. It's very difficult for those types of companies to be successful in an accelerator model. They need too much capital, and it's a lot more intensive research component to their business models. Incubators have been around, since the 80s. They're kind of like if the analogy is the tortoise and the hare. Accelerators are the rabbit, and incubators are the tortoise. They're there for the long haul. They're usually driven by economic development missions. So I imagine many of you guys have affiliations with incubators in your communities, if not overseeing them. They are about job creation. They bring in and they bring those collaborations together. So they'll bring in the investors. They'll introduce their entrepreneurs to the accelerators if that's the way they should go. These days, though, they're starting to look more cool than they used to. They're not just office spaces as much. There's a lot of co-working space type feel in them, at least those that are doing good things. And they tend to serve companies for several years. The best incubators have graduation policies. When companies grow up, they kick them out. They should, because the companies need to grow up. Doesn't mean they don't support them, but they need to kick them out. And they usually tend to serve companies, through the early growth stage. Sorry I took so long on that. It's important. Now, what's happening in our world, my members are getting with the program and realizing that co-working spaces are doing really cool stuff, and accelerators are doing really cool stuff, and incubators are doing really cool stuff. So why don't we bring them all together under one fell roof, and we'll call that a super hub. So that is the current trend in incubators, is bringing all these models under one roof. In some cases, they partner with accelerators or co-working spaces. In other cases, they're doing it all under their roof. They're bringing mentors, education, and things like that. Things incubators have done for years are still there, but they're bringing in these other components. So these are, what a super hub's goal is, like a co-working space, to create collision opportunities for the entrepreneurs. But the difference is it's very focused with an economic development mission to create growth companies that will create jobs in the communities that they're in. That's probably the biggest difference between a super hub and a co-working space. Some examples. Around the world, Sydney, Australia, 4 universities came together and built this. It's it will blow your mind if you ever go there. If you ever head to Australia, please go see Cicada. State-of-the-art facility. I have never seen 4 universities work together so well as I saw in this center, because universities don't like to work together, especially if they're in the same city. Again, like I said in the very first slide, though, everybody's got to come together and work together to serve those entrepreneurs, and they've done an amazing job. In this one space, they have partnered with 3 accelerators. They're not running them. They partnered with Y Combinator and whatnot and running them in their center. They bring in students from the universities to run through these programs. They use them to vet them. The ones that do well get to stay in the incubator. They have lab facilities, so they've got wet labs to serve biotech and clean tech companies, all under one roof. It's an amazing facility. In Poland, as I mentioned, I went to Poland, so the EC has provided a lot of funding to Poland in the last 10, 15 years, and they've used it well. They've created 3 or 4 super hub models. In a couple cases, they're tied to universities as well. In other cases, they're just running independently as entrepreneurship centers in their communities. I'm a little biased to Starter Studio. I was running this before I got my current job. But again, the entrepreneurs came together. I was one of them, and we built this thing from the ground up. We went and got an old building from downtown, convinced the landlord to give it to us for cheap, and that's what it looks like today. We have hundreds and hundreds of people showing up to the events, and we have 2 accelerators running out of that center right now. Here in Canada, you guys are also doing this. Some of these you might recognize. I bragged about Tech Edmonton there. All of these are, by the way, are NBI members. But Toronto's obviously Toronto. They've got a lot going on there. But they've got two great programs. And then District 3 is an up-and-coming, as is Tech Edmonton, with respect to following these models. So, okay, how am I doing on time? Good, okay. So what role do government and economic development organizations play in all of this? Oops, sorry, I think I skipped one. So as we've talked about already, convening the stakeholders, that is a key role and something that all of your organizations do very well. You can help facilitate, help people understand what their roles are, responsibilities, and make sure the right people are at the table. You can fill in, especially government, can fill in some of the gaps in funding. This is particularly true with the deep tech companies, which I personally believe are underrated and yet probably in the long haul going to be the thing that really is the next generation of accelerators. Software is all the rage. Right now, for obvious reasons. I mean, software is driving a lot of this stuff. It's easy to grow and exit a software company. But the hard work will come, and we're going to start figuring out how to solve, weather issues and energy issues and water issues and all the things that are heading to us like a freight train, which probably in the next century are going to hit us hard at a global level. Those are not going to be solved with a tech accelerator and a software company. It's going to be solved by great research and people coming together, to really make this stuff happen. Regulatory oversight, of course, policy around funding and financing and intellectual property and all those things. And then financing those infrastructure elements. All of you, I'm sure, are always paying attention to infrastructure in your communities. Some of these super hub models that I just talked about, that's a form of infrastructure that you guys can do and think about when you're serving the entrepreneurs in your local communities. And then at the federal level, most likely, and at the university level, funding research to help continue that innovation pipeline that is the ultimate, driver of all of this. I want to talk a little bit about accelerators funds again, because I had already talked about what a seed accelerator is, the private kind with the big fund. But a lot of communities don't have a Techstars or a big portfolio of venture capital companies. So if you're interested in technology in your communities, you might want to think about setting up what's called an evergreen accelerator fund. And this is something that a government agency or a sponsoring organization or whatnot can help with. Basically, make sure you have your entrepreneurs and your investors running this thing. Pretend like it's a private investment fund. But the funds that are raised go into it, and they invest in companies just as if it was a private fund, which means they're going to take some stock. And they, over time, those companies some will die, and some will percolate and grow. And for those that grow, when they exit out, the returns that come in go right back into the fund, and they fund the next generation of entrepreneurs. It's a tough business model. I'm not going to lie to you guys. You guys need to be prepared to be in this for the long haul. It takes 5 to 10 years to exit a typical company. And the fund needs to be big enough that it can be sustainable and fund the pipeline of companies through those 10 years, and then recognize that there's going to be some companies that fail in that portfolio. The reason you want investors and entrepreneurs leading this is because they are the most likely to pick the winners, because that's what they do for a living. Government officials, EDA officials, other policymakers, university administrators do not do that well. That's not their job. It's the job of the investors and the entrepreneurs. Let them do it. Pay attention and focus towards companies that are going towards scale up. And again, there's this total infatuation with software companies. It's super easy to go there. Think about the hard stuff, though, like I said. And companies that 10, 20 years from now could create hundreds of jobs in your communities. And it may not always be a software company. It could be a textile company or an energy company or anything else. But pay attention to what your strengths are in your community and go there. Let's see. Diversity. That's it. This is a big buzzword right now in policy, especially in the U.S., which is because there's a lot of research going on at the national level about the success rate of women entrepreneurs, in particular minority entrepreneurs, and how good they are at what they do and how investors don't invest in them. And a lot of it has to do with cultural and access and things like that. So from an economic development perspective, as you're thinking through programs and policies and things you might be funding, pay attention and make sure you're being very inclusive of everybody in your community, because you never know where the next entrepreneur is going to come from. And I just wanted to share some myths versus facts, because a lot of people think the typical entrepreneur is a white, young male, somewhere between, I'm going to say 18 and 35, probably running a software company through Techstars. In fact, the share of people under 30 who own a business is at a quarter-century low in the United States right now. It is not correct. A lot of them in the US have student debt. Hopefully you guys aren't doing that to your kids in Canada, because it's really stupid. But anyway, that number's fallen by 65% since 1980. In the US, the average successful founder is 40 years old. We are good. And entrepreneurs, over 55 are the fastest growing ones. If you think about it, they have established their careers. They have probably some savings. They can invest in their company. They probably know something. And at that age, their kids are out of the nest. They've got time. They're bored. Whatever. They are driving the entrepreneurial ecosystem, at least in the United States right now. Immigrants. We at the US right now are not doing this so well. You guys are killing it. I have studied Canada's immigration startup stuff ad nauseum, because I think it's really cool what you guys are doing. Take advantage of it. Because immigrants started pretty much all of the major tech companies in the United States. Google, you name them, they're all there. And those are the ones that grew to $1 billion companies. Those are the big ones. And women. Women-owned firms in the U.S. have grown 68% since 2007, but that minority women number is amazing, 265% growth since 2007. So it's rapidly changing in the United States. And from an economic development perspective, local communities as well as the federal government are paying attention to this dynamic and putting money where the trends are and starting to make sure that all of these types of entrepreneurs are getting the support they need to grow their businesses. Okay, let's see. You guys probably know this well in your worlds of economic development, but I just want to reiterate, make sure you measure what you build, because public dollars are at work here. Your constituents might get a little annoyed if you can't show that return. You do need to educate folks that this does take 10, 20 years to invest in, but there should be some growth every year. The other thing is practice what we preach to entrepreneurs. We tell them to start small and lean and build things one experiment at a time. Lean startup methodology is what that's called if you're not familiar with it. It works really well in the entrepreneurial world, so you don't spend way too much money building the wrong product that nobody wants. That's the ticket, and you guys should do the same thing with economic development programs. You start small, pilot them, measure them, test them, and throw them in the trash can if they're not working, and then try something new. But don't give up. Just go figure out something different or a cousin to what the first pilot was or whatever, and figure it out one entrepreneur at a time. And definitely steal great ideas from other communities. Nothing wrong with that. And you know why? Because entrepreneurship, you can do that. Because if you model what they've done in Tech Edmonton, up in different communities, it's not going to hurt Edmonton. Your entrepreneurs are in your community. You guys should, in fact, be sharing best practices and helping each other grow these entrepreneurial ecosystems, because it ultimately grows the entire region in your country. As I mentioned, just track metrics. I'm not going to beat this one to death. You guys probably know how to do that well. And then with respect to your communities, as I had said, this takes a long time. Everybody wants to be Silicon Valley when I travel internationally. I don't think so much in Canada because you guys know America's warts all too well, but other countries haven't quite heard the news yet. Anyway, but Silicon Valley has a 70-year head start on the rest of the world. They started, pre-World War II with some of the stuff they're doing, and sometimes people don't realize that. So it took them a long time too. But more importantly, every region has different resources, different ecosystems, different populations. So shout from the mountaintops on your own story. Tell your story. Don't worry about other people's story and how they're doing. Worry about you and be proud of it. And in closing, like I said, entrepreneurial economic development to me is really cool. I love what I do. And the more I travel around the world and see what everybody else is doing, I feel better about this every day because when somebody's building a really cool ecosystem in one community, it's not impacting another community. Economic development in the past has been, let's take this corporate headquarters and try to steal it, move it over to our community. Great for your community if you win, but you just really hurt that other community. It's a win-lose proposition when that stuff happens. Entrepreneurship is win-win all the way, and it's a really cool model. And honestly, it's the wave of the future. So with that, I'm good.